We can't have a little fun to start things off. So this is an old protest song from the 60s, and unfortunately it's still kind of relevant today. It goes like this. There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware. Think it's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 10,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs. They mostly say hooray for our side. Think it's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. Sound a little familiar? It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, man come and take you away. Think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us. Now a word from the pastor.
Good evening. Oh, he's tall. I am so excited to see you all here. You have no idea how full my heart is right now. This happened in a week, my friends. I got a random email from Pastor Doug. He said, hey, I work with Common Good, Vote for Common Good. This is what we do, and we'd like to come to Hackettstown. Will you host us? And I was like, yes! So Church and Society is hosting this. Church and Society is your local branch of the social justice arm of the United Methodist Church. And I hope that you're here with open hearts and open minds to listen to what they have to say, and that you're going to come away with some new understanding. Amen? All right, so Pastor Doug, come on up and do your thing.
Deb and all in this church, thank you so much for taking us. Okay, so that story is true. I actually looked back, Deb, at the email. It was 10 days ago, last Monday at 6:26 in the morning. We're living on a bus. We travel around normally on a bus, and we should have this bus here for you, but it broke down yesterday over in Wilkes-Barre and has been having a part replaced. So we're just heartbroken that you don't get to climb on the bus with us out there. But at 6:26, I'm sleeping in my little bunk in there, which literally the bunks are, I can't put my hand, my tips of my finger and my elbow to the top inside my bunk. So it's that big. So I'm laying in this little bunk, messaging people, and we realized at that point that we were coming here to Hackettstown, because we're adding stops on this tour. We're on this national tour. This is our 32nd event that we've done since September 22nd. traveling around the country. We've been all the way down to Texas. I mean, we're just going every which way. Really targeted conversations. We're in town because we did an event with the person running for Congress here, Tom Malinowski, and we wanted to support that campaign. So when we also go to those places, we've added in these events. In fact, it was the 18th or 19th of September when we decided to also include these trainings that you're going to experience tonight. So these are really new in our offerings. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But it was Monday morning, a week ago, Monday, 10 days ago, 6:26, I sent a message off, Dr. DeVos. You don't know me, but I looked up your church. You look like the kinds of people that might be interested in this. Any chance you'd be willing to host this conversation? And she writes back and says yes. I got to tell you, starting with people that will say yes is not just good in improv, it's good in spirituality, and it's just good in humanity. So thank you so much. And then honestly, the website, catchthespirit.org. Like, who was front edge on that name that got that thing? That is fantastic. So that probably happened a long time ago, but just really great. So our hearts are really full being here, and it's been a really great day. It's also been a long day for us. Our bus had a little trouble last night. We wondered we were going to drive it over to the Prevost place. It's Prevost brand bus over here in New Jersey, and they were going to work on it. And we took off at 4:45 in the morning, and about 4:55 in the morning, it stopped. So there we are on the side of the highway in the middle of nowhere in the Poconos. Like, what do we do now? We'll tell you the whole story about how we ended up here tonight. But anyway, it wasn't totally sure we were going to end up here. But we're traveling about and we're saying to people what's on this banner: faith, hope, and love, and not insurrections and Christian nationalism. Never thought we'd have to do that. Our organization, Vote Common Good, travels and asks faith voters to make the common good their voting criteria, to ask them to deepen into their sense of faith, their sense of hope, and their sense of love, and make that their voting criteria on Election Day for the common good. We didn't know ever that we would have to say explicitly, that means you don't pay the lawyers' bills of the insurrectionists. That means you say no specifically to candidates and to other politicians who are asking for the United States to become an explicitly Christian nationalist country. There's something new afoot. So we've put these conversations together. It gets a little intense tonight, not because we're overly intense about it, but just the topic gets heavy. And there's a number of things that we're going to do tonight in our conversation about confronting Christian nationalism. We're going to try to help you leave here tonight with a greater understanding of what Christian nationalism is. There's almost everyone we meet, in the circles that would say yes to us, will say to themselves and to others, oh, I'm against Christian nationalism. Of course I'm against Christian nationalism. And then they'll often want to say, and what exactly is it again? Because I'm not totally sure. It kind of falls into that, what I call the 1-word, 10-word, 100-word understanding. See, some things we should be able to say and express in 1 word, some things in 10 words, some things in 100 words. Some things we may want to have a version of each of those. And you kind of want to get your number right. Like when someone says, but honey, do you love me? The 100-word answer is not the best one, right? You don't start with, well, it's complicated. Let's talk about dopamine levels. Let's talk about what we mean by, right? Yes or no. So some of you have said, not Christian nationalism. That's my answer. Like Christian nationalism? Nope. We want to help you expand your ability to talk about why. Maybe it's 10 words you'll leave here being able to say. Maybe it's 100 words. Maybe it's more. But that's what we're hoping to do, is to expand your vocabulary some. And I'll also say this. We want to deepen your sense of empathy. We're hoping that you're going to leave here. We're going to get to these 3 questions of what can churches do, or what is Christian nationalism, what can churches do, what can individuals do, and I'll be a big spoiler in case you have to leave early. The what can individuals do, deepen into our empathy and engagement. It's our best response for what we do for around the issues of Christian nationalism. Because people hold this belief. You're going to find that out. You're going to see a lot of statistics tonight. You're going to hear from a bunch of experts on video and so on, and you're going to come away with a deeper sense of it. People hold these beliefs, and they hold them for reasons, and it's much more prominent in our society than some people might come into the night thinking about. And these are our fellow citizens. These are not other people. These are people in the United States. These are people in our churches. These are people at our cafes. These are people that are our neighbors. This is us. And we have to figure out ways to understand the us and to move the us into ways that are going to be more inclusive for more people in more ways. I want to be really specific. When we say faith, hope, and love, We're not asking our politicians to make anyone's particular faith their legal understanding. We're asking voters to be motivated by a sense of faith. But when an elected official has to declare a law, has to write a law, has to vote for a law, they need to have more reasons than just their holy scriptures tell them this and such. That's not how we do laws in the United States of America. That becomes difficult for some people, and we're going to talk about it in the curriculum tonight. So that's going to come up. So I want to deepen your sense of understanding what it is and your sense of empathy and ability to help people understand this. But we also want to help churches know what to do and individuals. So we're hoping that you'll leave here with some sense of understanding and empowerment and all the rest. We'll have some time for conversation. We're going to break it up with a little bit of music throughout the night. So that's how it's going to go. Okay. I want to just start with this. I believe that the threat of Christian nationalism is real and it is very worrisome. There is a new strain of Christian nationalism in America. Take the coronavirus as a working metaphor. Remember back in January of 2020 when you started hearing about it and we didn't even know what to call it? Coronavirus, and the people at the beer company were like, could we please have another name for that? And then the Delta variant came around, and then the airline people were like, could we please have another name for that one? And then we started to learn about the variants in a virus. Well, look, Christian nationalism has been alive and well in America from the very beginning. There have been people arguing for a more Christian nationalist country. But what's happening now is unique. There's something else afoot. We're going to talk about some of the conditions that have bred that. So we're not just talking about a historic reflection. We're going to try to make all of our conversations tonight feel very right now. There's other people who do training on the history of Christian nationalism and the founding of the country and the important work around some of the documents that we've used in the foundation of the country. We'll reference that stuff, but our issue is what's happening right now in real lives, on ballot boxes, in people's families, in people's homes, that kind of thing. That's what we're going to try to be talking about. So a lot of what you're going to see tonight is going to look, we want it to be very up to date and very right now. Some of this presentation we're even changing daily. We've made some updates today with some new content in it because new content is coming out on almost a daily basis about this. So I think it's real and it's very worrisome. We're going to show you a couple of clips out of an MSNBC special that I stumbled onto about 2 months ago, maybe a month. I don't even know what day it is right now. We're in late October. So I think it was early September that I saw this MSNBC special, and it was about a congresswoman who won an special election in Texas in June in the 34th Congressional District. Her name is Mayra Flores. And she was in a special election, and she won, and it became an important election for a couple of reasons. One, the district flipped from one that was a congressperson that was a Democrat to Mayra Flores winning as a Republican, which was a big deal, right on the border. And she was running under a motto that she and her pastor referred to as the real MAGA movement, which is Make America Godly Again. And it's a statedly Christian nationalist agenda. So this whole thing got very interesting to people, and a lot of people have been paying attention to it. We happened to notice that was happening because a year ago when she was running for office, we were on a bike ride. We rode our bicycles from San Diego, California to St. Augustine, Florida, and including all along the U.S.-Mexico border. So it was 3,150 miles, and a bunch of people in this room were along on that ride. And we're going to be doing versions of that again. So if that's got your wheels spinning or something, keep up with us. We'd love to take you on the road with us. And we were riding through this part of like Halligan, Texas. We saw these signs that were for her, and they were God and family and faith and all these kinds of political signs. We thought, what is up here? And well, you're going to see a little bit of that. So we're going to show you 3 excerpts out of this special. I think they do a really great job of treating these folks with honesty and integrity and want them to hear for themselves. That's one of our intentions tonight, is we want you to hear directly from people. I'm going to do everything I can to not overstate the threat of Christian nationalism. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. We're not going to be like, if you really understood what this tweet meant, then you would really understand what they're getting at, but they're not telling you what they're getting at. We're not going to take that approach. We're going to talk about the very outward spoken things that people say and do and how they act, and we're going to deal with that. I have 2 friends in my mind that are Christian, that I think would fit the Christian nationalist bill. And I sort of will imagine them sitting here and here tonight. And everything I say about Christian nationalism that tries to describe it and give its context, I want to say it in such a way that I believe that if they were sitting here, they would say, you got us right. We might disagree with you, but you're not overstating, you're not understating, you're not caricaturing us. That's really important. Deep understanding is essential to us moving on all kinds of issues. And understanding is not the same thing as agreement, right? In fact, you can't get to good, solid disagreement until you really understand. And I think until you can share your somebody else's idea in such a way that they would say, you've got me right there. That's an important part of it. So that's going to be part of what we're doing. And this piece from MSNBC, which is, you're going to see 3 pieces from this over the course of the night, is a part of that. So here we go.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government, some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state, some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know. Because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
Okay, so these are the kinds of things that maybe has gotten you in this room tonight. It caught media attention when 3 elected representatives to the United States Congress, Mayra Flores, Representative Boebert, and Representative Green, are publicly saying the kinds of things that you see in that video. We should be a Christian nation. The separation of church and state is junk, and I'm tired of it. And yes, I believe we should be a Christian nationalist country. We should always put God first. These are the kinds of things, not coming from pastors, not coming from parishioners, not coming from people in seminars or in cafes, coming from elected representatives. It's going to be an important part of when we give you some definitional stuff tonight. But it's not just what people are sort of randomly saying, it's what's actually happening. And part of what got us to create a curriculum that you'll see represented on the table and it turned into this live presentation after January 6, 2021, was the attack on the U.S. Capitol was a outflow of Christian nationalist thinking. We're going to show you a video here of people inside the Senate dais. These are among the first people in the building. It was shot by someone who was on assignment with the New Yorker magazine. It's a war correspondent and went into the Capitol with the insurrectionists. You'll notice some famous people from that if you followed the news, including the person who's often referred to as the QAnon shaman with the horns and the vests and the painted face, is the one leading the prayer in the Senate dais. So what you're about to see here is an indication that what happened on at the insurrection was not just a few Christian flags and a couple of crosses in a big crowd, but the very point of the spear, first people in declaring what they're up to, is this message. And this is about as Christian nationalist of a message as I think you're going to see.
All the way back to the monument of D.C.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen.
Amen.
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs. Yes. That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.
So part of what makes a lot of us nervous is that what happened on January 6th, I don't believe was a one-off. I think it's a part of a strategy. And it's a part of a more militant, violent expression of Christian nationalism. Or better said, that violence is being baptized by Christian nationalist thinking as if they're on a mission from God. And it's not some fun 1970s and 80s reference that we're on a mission from God. It's people violently attacking the United States government under that auspices. So these are the kinds of things that have a number of us concerned. And we also know that people are talking very straightforwardly about the intention to utilize Christian nationalism in Christian communities to establish conservative political ideology. You're going to hear in a little bit a number of experts that are going to say to you, Christian nationalism is fundamentally a political ideology. It's not even a political party. It's a political ideology, however. And you'll see a bit of that. This man, Abram Enriquez, he's somebody who organized the work that Representative Flores did in utilizing churches in the Make America Godly Again movement in Texas. And you'll hear his comments here.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize the Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms. So it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Myra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Myra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So if Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors and churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church, there will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, and country. Why do you think those 3 words resonated so much?
It is.
With Latinos specifically.
It is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith. Faith in something. Faith in having, understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous
slogan.
thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator, being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Myra Flores was able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country.
Mm-hmm.
Those are her words. Mm-hmm. Do you support something like
100%.
that?
100%.
Do you support the United States being a Christian nationalist country? 100%. This is the kind of thing, saying it out loud, when people say they now just say it out loud, they're not just working on the sides. It's directly, that is an agenda item among some people. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the spectrum of Christian nationalism, how people see themselves and so on. But there is a certain set of people with a very deliberate agenda politically that also want it to be a Christian nationalist country. This is part of the reason it's in the news, why we're traveling and others, because we're no longer simply in a situation where it's a fringe movement. 5 years ago, I was saying to other pastor friends of mine, don't worry about Christian nationalism. I mean, it's fringy. No one's going to do anything about it. It's not something we need to be concerned with. I don't know if I was just dead wrong or if it's just changed so dramatically, maybe a combination of the two. But the situation we are in now, where this kind of thing is so common and is such a conversation point, where there are people running for elected office on a Christian nationalist agenda, is something that is akin to previous times in the United States history. You could take yourself into the 1780s, you could take yourself into the 1870s, you could take yourself into the 1930s and see the places where those movements were also afoot. And there's another one of those happening now that's new and fresh and happening in new ways, and not simply limited only to white churches. That's another movement that is afoot that we all should pay attention to. Now, I want to say a couple of things. Definitionally, when we talk about Christian nationalism, we're saying that Christian nationalism is, as a threat, it's not about people exercising their faith. It's not about telling Christians not to be active with their faith. It's not telling Christians not to be active in the public sphere. It's not telling Christians not to be active in politics. Absolutely. Let your faith drive you. Say, this is why I'm here. This is what motivates me and gets me up in the day, if that's what motivates you and gets you up in the day. It's not an issue of being Christian in America. It's an issue of the government exercising the government's power to advocate for, to derive the government's authority from, or to privilege any faith. It's not about voter activity. It's about the government saying Christianity has a preferred place in America, and it is the default from which we derive our power, the thing that we want to accomplish, and the rationale for what we do. That's the difference. We live in a country where people of lots of faiths are going to contribute, where people are going to be motivated by all kinds of things. I'm so glad that I have the privilege of my representative in Minneapolis, where I live. Her name is Ilhan Omar, and she's Muslim. And I want her to deepen into her faith, and I'm going to deepen into my faith, and I vote for her not because we're in the same faith family or community or agree on our religious beliefs, but because we both believe in the common good. That's why I vote for her. That's what my commitment is. But when she goes to set a law, when she goes to vote for a law, I don't want her turning just to her Quran for the only place she's going to find her inspiration, to take passages from the Quran and make it the law. And I don't want people going into the Jewish text or into the Gospels. Our lawmakers need to be motivated by something other than religious conviction. Now, they may match up at times, but if you don't have a paired rationale, then you're simply putting forth a religious identity and a religious understanding. In other words, if someone says, well, I believe that God says we shouldn't murder. I'm like, I'm with you. So I think we shouldn't have the death penalty. I'm an anti-death penalty activist. I agree with you. But if the only reason you think we shouldn't have the death penalty, or that murder should be prohibited by people against one another in this country, if you think that's the only reason because it comes from your scripture, then you need to come up with another reason. It's not simply enough to say my Bible or my sacred text tells me so, or my church has taught me this, or my faith holds to this. This is the thing we've been working at as a nation all along, is where's the role of the citizenry, and from what authority do we draft the power of the government? And the truth of the matter is, we've been wrestling with this for a really long time. From the founding, like, let's make a constitution, and then we're going to have an amendment, and amendment number 1 is going to include separations between religion and the state, that the government shall establish no religion and shall prohibit none. Right off the bat, they're like, we got to talk about it. We got to figure this out, because some of the colonies at the start of our nation had a history of being for certain religious groups. Religion has played a deep sense of identity formation in the United States, and we're having to work it out. I think we're moving in a direction toward Christian nationalism that is not healthy for this country. It's dangerous for its citizens, it's bad for the faith, and it's not going to allow a government to function. We can't function under this. So we have to distinguish between these different motivations and where the government gets its power. Now this group, this is the Family Research Council. Last Wednesday, October 12th, I think maybe just after I maybe wrote to Deb, or maybe just before, they had a webinar, an online webinar. And by the way, we record these and then we put them up online too. So we have lots of our other sessions that have been up, and this one tonight will go up. So if you have friends that want to watch it, you can. Or if you want to go watch this one, you can. It runs about an hour and 15 minutes, or an hour and 45 minutes long. But their question is, the rise of the term Christian nationalism. Where did it come from and how is it being used? Right? So I'm going to try to describe very similar Christian nationalism. Where did it come from? How is it being used? So are they. So this is a conversation that's happening on all sides of the political aisle. There's very little politically or even religiously that I would hold in common with these folks. Now, I'm an evangelical. I come from the evangelical background, the little thin sliver of progressive evangelicals that some people don't even know exist. But there's a little, trim around the edge that we call the progressive evangelicals, the social gospel evangelicals, that crowd. But I would have very little in common with these folks. But we're at least talking about the same conversation. Talking about it in some radically different ways, though, I might have you say. Or you might say. They asked this question as a polling question during the course of their event. And the question is, what is Christian nationalism? So they did the poll 3 different times during the course of the event. One option is, well, I'm not certain what it is, but it's definitely not what the left says it is. Option number 1. Option number 2, what is Christian nationalism? A creation of the media. Number 3, an attempt to intimidate Christians who care about their country. Or 4, all of the above. Okay? So one perspective is Christian nationalism, just a construction of the left or something of the media or some attempt to get Christians to be less Christian when they care about their country. I think there's some other options. I think it's true political movement that utilizes religion toward its political ends and goals. It's been studied, and we're going to talk about all that. It's not that. I'm probably going to lean in too hard to making this point, so I'll just tell you I'm leaning in hard. It's not about telling Christians not to be Christian. But it is reminding people of faith that they're not the only ones here, and your faith does not actually give you privileged place in our society. And it shouldn't. I saw a training on diversity, and the diversity trainer, and this was on racial and ethnic diversity training, and the trainer said, how many of you are committed to diversity? And people were all in the room, to a self-selected group. So they all raised their hand. And then the trainer said, if somebody has their hand up and could answer for us, the rest of us, when you say diverse, you mean diverse from what? And then the trainer said, if you meant diverse from white, then you're seeing that you're starting with whiteness as the default. And everything else is diverse from the default. Well, most of the world isn't considered white, so why is that the default, right? Similarly with Christian nationalism. If people believe that Christianity is the norm, or they want to say Judeo-Christian life is the norm, and everything else is in response to it, that's the kind of thing that starts to feel like Christian nationalism, as opposed to there's just a lot of us. And we all come from different places, and there's more of some and less of others, and some have had more of a history in this country of positions of power, and some have been more excluded, but we're all in this. This is the kind of thing that goes on. And frankly, these questions that happen in this event, they feel like that. So much so that we'll show you this little example. The person you're about to hear from is the pastor at the church where this came from. And I think what he says here kind of captures it, and I think it shows how some pastors find it difficult to even articulate what Christian nationalism is and why it would be a worry, because they see their own faith as such a central part of the American experience. What he's referring to just before this, only less than a minute long clip, but what he's talking about was President Biden's speech, a speech that President Biden gave, where President Biden used the phrase, the soul of America. You might know, if you pay attention to politics, that President Biden uses that phrase a lot. It's part of his theme for the work that he does, talking about we have to rebuild and care for the soul of America. And this is what the pastor says.
It's the right and privilege and duty and responsibility and honor of the Church of Jesus Christ to take care of the soul of America, in the sense that we have the gospel, which is the only good news that heals the soul of America, or any country.
So what he's suggesting is the government's role is not to care for the soul of America. It's the Church of Jesus Christ that is responsible for the soul of America. It's the Church of Jesus Christ's job. Now, it raises a great question, right? Probably the one in all your minds. Which churches? Which expression of faith, right? But the question is not really which one gets to be in charge of the soul of America. It is no religious community is more responsible. Now, a religious community might say, we take it as our duty, for us as our own duty, to care for the soul of America. But the rest of America doesn't need to agree with you about that. And that's where Christian nationalism starts to creep in, is this idea, oh, Christianity is the default, Christianity is the norm, Christianity is what really is responsible for America and wants to welcome everyone else, but you know, as loving in-laws, not as the true blood and soil family members. This is a big, big piece of what's going to go on with Christian nationalism. Here's an example. This just took me in a way that, I had a very hard time from election night in 2016 for a few years. And this is the thing I worried about, and then we heard. Now, this is Jeff Sessions when he was the Attorney General of the United States of America. I'm not making any claims at all about the faith of Jeff Sessions, other than to say he professes to be a Christian, and I believe anyone in any profession of faith they make about anything. So I don't question his faith in one bit. He's making comments here about the rationale for family separation at the U.S.-Mexico border, using the separation of children from their family as punitive punishment so that people will not cross the border seeking asylum. And he's talking about, you'll hear it at the end, that's what he goes to, and he talks a bit about that. But here's his rationale for it.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
All right, so I have watched this a whole bunch of times. There's 3 movements to that little bit. One of them I agree with, that middle part. Following the law is important. I wish everyone in the administration would have done that and would continue to do that. I think that's really important. We should advocate for that. The things on either side of that family separation is not a problem and is not unusual, oh yeah, it is. And yes, it is, in my opinion. But that first bit, I commend to you the Apostle Paul in Romans 13. Now look, as a pastor, I might want to say that to all of you. I might want to say, hey, we should think about the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Apostle Paul and what was written in the book of Titus or what you're going to find in the book of Genesis or Galatians. For sure, we should talk about that because we want to go to the border and we want to help you. Yep, but when you're the Attorney General of the United States declaring a new practice of law on behalf of the United States, you don't start with the Apostle Paul. That's the kind of thing that, frankly, one of the reasons there's a new variant of Christian nationalism is because the Christian nationalists, and I'm not accusing them of this, I'm repeating what they say, have said that what they saw in the Trump administration was such clear, concise approval of Christian nationalist understanding that they feel that any attack on that administration is attack on Christianity. So they're deeply convinced that it was a Christian nationalist movement. We're going to get to that later about why people support Christian nationalism and how they get into it and what it is. But this is the kind of example that I'm getting at when we suggest it's not the role of the motivation of the voters. It's when the government says, where does our rationale for our law come from? You don't say Romans 13. Even if you think it, your stated purpose, your stated rationale ought not be that. And that is such a clear violation in my estimation. Here's another one that I think will capture some of your attention.
We have the power of God with us. We have Jesus Christ that we're serving here. He's guiding and directing our steps. And in November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so.
That man is running for office in Pennsylvania, and he has declared it in many ways over and over. What we're going to do, because my God is going to make it so, is make biblical instruction the law of the land in Pennsylvania. These are the kinds of things that people are talking about that are concerning. Now, one of my friends who I picture in my mind that's sitting right here, he wrote something on my Facebook post and said, God, you people in your Christian nationalism, there's so many other things to worry about. It's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. All right, so if we agree on what it is, then it's fair enough for someone to say, I don't think that's a big deal. I mean, I think it's such a big deal. We drive around and talk to strangers about it at 8 o'clock at night on a Thursday, you know? Yeah, okay, so I think it's a big deal. You don't think it's a big deal. We can have that conversation. But let's not try to say that Christian nationalism is something else, because this is really what it is about. So we're going to show you some things that experts have said about Christian nationalism as well. You're going to meet someone named Catherine Stewart. She has written this book called The Power Worshippers. If you're into books, some people take their phones out right now and then they take this quick picture because you want this book. Catherine, she's Jewish, and her daughter went to a school, public school, and came home and said, Mom, why am I going to hell? She said, what's happening at school? You know, it's like her third grade daughter. And found out that there was a thing at her school called the Good News Club. And that it was a place where some Christian teaching that would accuse Jewish kids of eternal sins was being taught. And that caused her to write a book called The Good News Club and got her into studying Christian nationalism. Now, her subtitle is The Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, partly because it's a broader topic. And she also said she's Jewish and she didn't want to be the one only, you know, saying that she was only attacking Christianity, but she's really talking about Christian nationalism. But this is Catherine. She's just excellent. These videos, you'll see a number of videos that look like this. These were interviews that we did at Vote Common Good with a number of experts after the January 6th. It's part of the curriculum that's available online. So we've created these short little video clips so you could use them in a small group conversation. And there's a downloadable PDF that you can use as discussion guide and all the rest of it. So you'll see a format like this. I'm on the screen over there with Stephanie, and then you'll see another time where Christy is also on. So the three of us were the hosts of these conversations. We had different people on. So you'll see this format over the time as we go. And here's Catherine Stewart.
Let's talk about what Christian nationalism is and let's talk about what it is not. The first thing to know is it's not Christianity or even a religion at all, properly speaking. It's a political ideology, and its representatives insist that the foundation of legitimate government is bound up with a reactionary understanding of the Christian faith. It basically says that the United States is founded on the Bible, and that our country can only succeed if it stays true to this foundation. It's also a device for mobilizing and often manipulating large segments of the population by getting them to vote for the political candidates that the movement favors, and basically for creating a new elite, concentrating power in the hands of a new leadership cadre of people who subscribe to illiberal ideologies. It's important to know that it's a leadership-driven movement. It's not sort of bottom-up. It's not driven by the rank and file. It's a top-down movement. Or to say something else about what the movement is not. It is not just about evangelicals. I mean, it includes some evangelicals, but it excludes many evangelicals, including some white evangelicals and most evangelicals of color. And it also includes representatives of a variety of both Protestant and non-Protestant religion. Ultra-conservative Catholics, in particular, have become a critical element, and the movement actually even has support from individuals and groups that do not identify as Christian at all. And what unites them is not a distinct theology, but a common political vision.
So that's Catherine. Her book is full of great stuff like that. We really commend it to you if you're interested in these conversations. But that's really important that she's saying, look, separate it out. You're going to hear this from a number of experts. It's not just Christians doing Christian stuff. There's an agenda behind Christian nationalism that's different than your average person's just clicking along in life and thinking, what am I going to do about my Christianity? Should I live my faith in the public sphere? That's not the conversation that's going on. You're also going to, I'm going to introduce you to someone named Amanda Tyler. You're going to just love Amanda. Amanda works with an organization called the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Now, depending on what your religious background has been or political background, you might hear Baptist Joint Committee and Religious Liberty and only think one sort of stream. She's from the American Baptist tradition, and when they talk about religious liberty, it's a freedom of religion and from religion in the United States government. So she's a lawyer. A lot of her group are lawyers. They're in Washington, D.C. They do lawyerly work to represent people so that Christianity or any religion is not prevented from expression, but also isn't overextending itself into our political spaces. So that's the kind of work that they do. And because they're lawyers, they like statements, and we love working with them. They started a project called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and they put together a statement that like 25,000 people or so have signed on. You can go to their website. You can sign up for it. We work with them. We're really good partners. We're really proud of their work. I'd commend you to go there and sign up on their website and get on their mailing list and follow along in what they do. And this is Amanda in the upper right. That's Christy down there on the lower right. And this is Amanda sharing about her perspective, which I think is crucial to all of this.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org. You know, the work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. You know, one, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism. And so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols, and in some cases, even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together, called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag. We can protest in the streets. We can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism. That's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
Really helpful, isn't it? Now, there's a long conversation where I think we talked for 30 minutes. So if you're interested in that longer conversation, you can find the whole thing there and follow along with Amanda and the work that she's doing. She referenced two people named Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead. They're quite experts in this field. They're both sociologists, one in Indiana and one in Oklahoma. And they study this the way sociologists study this. And they've written a book called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. They never knew it was going to be as popular of a book as it turned out to be, because it's turned out to be quite popular. And I think I should ask them if they've wondered if they should have put what I think they should have as their subtitle, The Threat of Christian Nationalism in the United States, because it's not really clear from the title, is it for or against? But I guess they're sociologists and they're trying to just describe the situation rather than lay it out. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to know about how sociologists talk about things. So you might know this already, but I'll just do a refresher for those for whom it might have slipped them. Sociologists ask questions, and they rank people on where they come down on a particular topic. So there's a series of questions that have been asked by a number of researchers over time in the United States, and there's a big database of how people answer these questions. Should the United States declare our country as a Christian nationalist country? Should there be religious monuments in public places? Should there be prayer in school? Questions like that, right? And it lands people with yes and no's and maybes and that kind of thing. And then all that data becomes a data source. Well, what Sam and Andrew have done is they've created a scale based on big data answers as well as their own. And this is really crucial. They say it's really crucial, and I agree with them. They say you can sort of see a scale where you get a 0-point value on how you answer questions, maybe all the way up to a 24 on the point value. And they make a really important distinction that Christianity is not a spot. Christianity is a spectrum. You're somewhere in the room, not only on one spot. It's not a game of Twister, in other words. What they suggest is that if you're over here on the blue and green side, you're the rejectors and resistors of Christian nationalism. So I would put myself in the category of being a rejector. Like, I think it's a bad thing. I think we shouldn't have it. I think we should go out and travel around on buses and tell people about it, right? Give warnings and all that kind of stuff. Classic rejector behavior. Then there's a group of resistors. These are people who would say, like, Christianity's not something we should mandate through our government. We should stay out of it. We shouldn't have Christian nationalism. But, I'm not going to go out and do stuff about it. Then way over on the far side, there's the ambassadors, the people promoting Christian nationalism, the people we've seen on the screen. Do you think the United States should be a Christian nationalist country? 100%, right? Abraham Enriquez, 100% if I'm comfortable as a rejector, I think he's comfortable as an ambassador. I think you'd consider that to be fair. But then there's a group of people that are the accommodators. These are people who are kind of like the resistors. They're not going to go out and recruit people. They're not going to wave it as a flag, literally or metaphorically. They might not even say, I'm a Christian nationalist. But their views express Christian nationalism. Like, well, of course we're going to have prayer at the Friday night football game. And since, America's history is as a Christian nation, the prayer should be Christian. Like, we shouldn't have Muslim prayer at the football game or a Sikh prayer at the football game. We should have Christian prayer because, and if we're going to have chaplains in the Senate, which we do, or chaplains in the House, then they should be Christians and invite others in. But, it's like that kind of thing. And, the history of America, we started as a Christian country, so wouldn't it be good if we got back to our roots? This kind of thing, right? But they're not out pushing it. Here's the thing. About 21% of people are in the ambassador category of the population of the United States, and somewhere around 30 to 36% of people are in the accommodator section, which means 50 to 56% of people in the United States are self-identified in spaces that would be considered Christian nationalists. It's not some little fringe. It's a lot. It's just us. It's around. Now, what I have found to be important here is many people don't use it as a phrase to identify themselves. My metaphor for this is, as somebody who lives in Minnesota, I'm a Midwesterner. But I rarely wake up in the morning and say, oh, to be a Midwesterner and to live in the Midwest, right? It only comes up if I travel the East Coast and somebody says, where are you from? And I say, I'm from the Midwest. Okay, got it. Or I'm from Texas. Like, it just lands you in a space. But it's not a self-identified narrative. It's not a self-identification label. But it's where I live. It's true. That's how Christian nationalism sort of functions. A lot of people don't use it as a phrase, but they live in it. So that's what they're doing with their studies. So now you're going to hear from them in what they've done in this book. And that's, of course, if you can read the screens, Andrew on the left and Samuel on the right. And they talk about what they found in working with and talking to people who are in these categories in their research. And the research, basically, Andrew's going to say, and it's just sometimes a little hard to hear because we didn't plan on playing these videos like in live rooms and stuff when we're recording them on Zoom, after when it was all going on. But he's basically going to say that Christian nationalism functions in people's lives as more of a determiner of social views rather than the rather than being the byproduct of other views. So in other words, racist language, racist activity might come from Christian nationalism, not the other way around. So it's an interesting finding that they have, and they talk about that in a lot more here.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in first and then let Sam finish it off. So in our book, we performed we're able to get data on these large national surveys, and we asked respondents 6 different questions where they could strongly disagree to strongly agree with them. Things like, the United States is part of God's plan, or the federal government should advocate Christian values, or declare the U.S. a Christian nation. And so the degree to which people strongly agreed with those or strongly disagreed, we assigned them point values, and we're able to create a scale by adding all those different questions together. And we did that because it's really important to understand that Christian nationalism isn't a binary, yes or no, but that Americans really are all along a spectrum where some embrace it really strongly. Some, see, Christianity being a part of what we do in the U.S. is important, and others kind of resist that, or the rejectors who we see on the very end of the scale say, there should be no fusion of this type of Christianity, which we define in our book is really this idea of a white, conservative, natural-born citizen. That's the Christian that they're talking about. American civil society shouldn't be fused to this type of Christianity. And so when we're able to create that scale, we can now look at, well, how do these respondents view the world? And there were 3 basic things that we tried to do throughout the book and were our main takeaways. Is the first, that Christian nationalism matters. And so Sam, he'll be able to share, even with his more recent data, that when we're looking at anti-democratic attitudes, or we're looking at policing of African Americans, if we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot button issues, Christian nationalism consistently matters over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally. When we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or being a faithful Christian. Because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so, yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values 3 things primarily: power, and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. that Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. That's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
It's a lot, isn't it? I mean, just that little bit is so dense, right? So much coming at you. Like, it functions in the world. It's determinative about how people are going to view things, and it's power, boundaries, and order. If you think back to some of the things you've seen, or as we go forward and what you're going to see on the screen, you might start to notice this power, boundaries, and order keep coming up. Our country and not theirs. Our rightful job to do this task and not someone else's. Who's going to be let in, who's not? What's the government's role in the pandemic and other things? This becomes part of the talking points. Now, I want to be perfectly clear from my vantage point, at least. Not every Republican is a Christian nationalist. Of course not. There's Christian nationalists who are Democrats. This thing is not just in one party or the other. There are some parties supporting it more and some parties working against it more. That's clearly going on. But it's not just so simple as simply to say, take political party and apply it to this. Okay? We got done with this presentation a couple nights ago, and this poor woman, she said, she was exasperated, and she said, I've been here for 2 hours. I still don't know what Christian nationalism is. Is it safe to say that they're just fascists and Nazis? Like, no, okay, yeah, I'm not telling you, what to do, but I don't think those are just one-to-one labels. I wouldn't go so far, right? So this is complicated. This kind of social organizing and social order and stuff, and figuring out how we describe social context is tough. All right, so our experience now has been that your brains start to get a little bit tired at this point, right? Like, you're just sort of, your brain is sitting there feeling like, holy moly, and we're only at it, oh my gosh. Okay, that's part one. What is Christian nationalism? That's the 100 words, okay? So you're going to pick and choose out of that. Dan here has been, like I said, I've been an evangelical pastor my whole adult life. I converted into that faith as a teenager. And those are people that cared for me, and I worked in those spaces, consider myself in that world. Dan, similarly, and was a worship pastor. And you going to say this part, or should I say this part?
Go for it.
Wrote this song, and then they fired him for it. So it's sort of a doozy, because sometimes so it's both part testimonial moment and also part sort of relieving, and it just sort of fills your heart with a little bit of soul while we go. So let your mind sort of relax for a minute. Maybe even if you're into it, take a nice deep breath. My wife is a yoga instructor. She's like, I watch your trainings. Give those people a minute to just breathe. Like, oh my gosh. So take this however it comes.
Yeah, I remember the first time I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know what Christian nationalism was. But it was the 4th of July, and it was in my sanctuary at the church that I grew up in. And there's this beautiful, tall stained glass cross. It's probably 40 feet tall. And on the 4th of July, they dropped this massive American flag that obscures the cross. And I remember walking into the sanctuary and just something didn't sit right with that symbolism, right? It was just a little too comfortable and a little too pushing Jesus behind the flag for me. And in the years since, I've been given the language to know that this is Christian nationalism. It's not okay. And we need to wake up to it and do something about it. We need to talk to the people in our lives and do what we can. And so, in a way, this song is about that conflation of God and country. It's called Hymn for the 81%. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred. Feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See, your fear it turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. And you weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth, and that's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. May love overcome and justice roll down. May love overcome Thank you.
Pretty good, huh? Yeah, you might be saying to yourself, man, I wonder if that song's on YouTube. I know it is, because that's where we first heard about it in 2020 when we were doing our tour around the country. Then we started hearing this song, and people would send it to us and say, I think this song is like what you guys are talking about, and Daniel Dietrich and the hymn for the 81%, and found a couple mutual friends, and called my friend Aaron, who knew Dan, and said, do you have Dan's number? And I called him and said, Dan, we're traveling around the country doing this thing. It sounds like your song is similar to what we're talking about. Any chance you could join us next Friday? And because we just call people late minute, and say hey, you want to show up in a room? Can you come to Minneapolis? He's like, yeah, I lost my job over that song, so I'm pretty much free to go, if you want me to. And now he travels around with us. So, it fits, and it's sort of what we're up to. All right. Part 2. And part 2 is not what can churches do and what can individuals do. That's part 3. Part 2 is, what's the motivation for people to get into Christian nationalism? What's attractive about it? You saw what it is, kind of maybe what it isn't, or maybe you're starting to frame it up and you realize, okay, it's this complex thing. So what is it that moves somebody? How does somebody end up holding those views that put you on the spectrum, or then holding views that lead you somewhere? How do people get there? That's a really important question. And I think for deep empathy and for deep engagement, it's good for us to know people have good reasons, right? You can't simply just say, I don't know, they're just wacky. It's not just wacky. There's reasons for them that are very good reasons for them. And we'll talk about some of this in a bit. In fact, I would say it's always good to ask people 3 questions if you're in trying to deep understanding mode. 3 questions are really helpful. One of those, of course, is, what do you believe? And if you know like deep listening and empathic listening, you have to ask that question and then really wait for them to answer without inserting in your head, like, I'm pretty sure I know what you believe, waiting for them to say it. So what is great? Why do you believe it? Super important. Tell me a bit about the rationale. How did you come to this? Then there's a third question. It's harder to just ask. You really have to find it by listening to a lot of things. And that's the question, what function does that belief play in your life? What is it doing for you? How does it operate? What good is it bringing you? So everyone's beliefs, like we might live with some beliefs we don't really like and can't really get rid of them, but they're doing something. They're in our lives functioning in some way. So I want to help you sort of get to some of each of those questions. I've put together a list of 5 streams that I think come together into the river of Christian nationalism. Some people might take 3 streams on their way in. Some people maybe just 1, some all 5. One of those is, the founding of the country. We started as a Christian nation, didn't we? So some people love an origin story, right? They're not just going to watch Batman. They're going to watch, where did Batman come from? This is going to be the origin story of Spider-Man, right? Love a good origin story. And for some people, that's a big question. You'll hear it in some of the examples we're going to show. A second stream people take is confusion between church and people. Churches sometimes add to this confusion. Like sometimes pastors will talk about the reality that churches aren't institutions. They're not big campuses like this. They're not buildings. Churches are the people. So you can start to hear how someone would say, we the people, the government is we the people. Hey, church, we're the people. And the church and people start to become synonyms for each other. And you hear this language. You're going to see it in a couple of examples. Where does the church end and the government begin? Well, how do you decide that if the church is the people, right? So this is partly intentional from some people's vantage, from some people's use, and partly people aren't really sure where the boundaries lie between those two. This third one is seeing the United States as the new Israel. This is really important. One of the things you'll often see with Christian nationalism is a comparison of the United States of America to Israel. A lot of use of Jewish text, or what Christians often refer to as the Old Testament, where Israel is the older, smaller brother, and the United States is the younger, bigger brother. Those friends that I have that sit in my mind and sit right here, Adam said to me when I was talking to him about this and wanted to sort of check my material and see if I was saying it in a way he was confident with and how does he view Christian nationalism and all. He said, well, I don't really know if I want to call myself Christian nationalism. I think you people use that as a derogatory term. So I don't want to align with it. So I don't think he went to Marjorie Taylor Greene's website and bought her t-shirt that's on her website saying proud Christian nationalist. I don't think he wants to wear it literally on his t-shirt. But he said to me, help me understand this perspective. He said, in his view, and Christian national, I think it's a classic Christian nationalist explanation, only two countries were born out of an idea from God. The nation of Israel with the blessing of Abram, and the United States of America. They hold that in common. So you'll see people take anything said in the Old Testament in Jewish scriptures to the nation of Israel becomes applicable to the United States of America. And then they'll use Christian symbol or Jewish symbols and Jewish texts and Jewish artifacts, blowing shafars, wearing prayer. If you've seen Christians that look and sound and feel like they're doing Jewish life, Jewish seders and prayer, that's a classic use of the United States as the new Israel, as well as the church as the new Israel. So for some people, you might come from a tradition where someone taught you that there's Israel, and then the manifestation of that then is the people of the faith that follows in the way of Jesus, who was a Jew, right? Well, they've inserted the United States of America in there. You'll hear that on a couple of occasions as we go through. We'll show you a number of examples of that. The fourth is people enter into it through a holy war narrative, spiritual warfare and spiritual battles. They feel like there's something up in the world, and our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the heavenly realm, spiritual warfare stuff. That's a big way. Almost all Christian nationalists that I know, especially if they're way over on the ambassador side or even on the strong accommodator leaning into ambassador side, they really like talking about warfare and spiritual warfare and enemies and all the rest of it. It's a big attraction. And then the fourth is the role of the United States in God's plan for the world as one of the places where established anointed leaders come. So I'll give you some examples of each of these, okay? So here we go. I'm going to show you a sermon that kind of grabs about 4 of these together. It's really a treat. It's a good one. It's Representative Boebert. She's representative from Colorado. That clip you saw at the beginning where she says, I'm sick and tired of this separation of church and state junk. This is that sermon. You're going to watch about 3 minutes here. That comment comes somewhere toward just the end. I wanted you to see how she gets into it and where she's going with it. Now, what's important to notice is the applause at the beginning and the reference she makes at the end of this clip we're going to show, where she turns to the pastor and says, thank you for your boldness. What they're applauding for at the start of the clip and what she's referring to at the end was this was a church in Colorado that did not close down during COVID, and the pastor was criminally charged for it. Part of the new variant of Christian nationalism in America is from the COVID response in the United States. So it's a perfect metaphor in that sense. A lot of these folks who hold Christian nationalist views have said they think that Christianity is being downgraded in the United States because they feel that the churches should have been given exceptional status. In other words, you're essential workers. If the Walmart can be open, if airplanes can fly in small confined spaces, why can't we have church services? They thought religious communities should have an exemption. So that's part of their motivation. I think there's really good reasons we didn't. I'm a pastor, I get all this stuff, but that motivates some of it. That's what she's talking about. But you're going to hear in this little bit, you're going to hear all the stuff from the founding of the country to the new Israel. She goes straight from the book of Esther right into your county commissioner's office without a comma. And it's just exemplar. It's just an example of how this happens very frequently, very commonly. I think what she does here is sort of a right down the middle, perfectly standardized kind of sermon sort of thing. And she's in a church service, an evangelical church service, because you can tell there are 2 guitars framing her on either side. So there's my tradition. So here we go. Oh, look at right here. Yeah, there they are too. There's 2 here and 2 there. So, 1 for 1s. They have an electric guitar though, yeah?
Just because it comes from someone who's elected or a bureaucrat doesn't mean that it's right. This isn't about Republican and Democrat. This is about evil and good, right and wrong. And if you go to Esther 4, in verse 14, Mordecai is talking to Esther, and he says, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Mordecai is telling Esther, if you remain silent, if you don't show up to your board of county commissioners, if you don't show up to your school boards, if you don't let your elected representatives know what's on your mind, deliverance will come at some point from another place, but not from you. And you will be stuck in that bondage and suffer and perish because of it. The dreams and the gifts and callings that God has on you will remain dormant. If you are silent, you lose by default. That's why I run my mouth often and give God glory. I don't want to lose by default. I don't want to be disqualified. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now we could take that scripture and make it really cliche. It sounds really pretty and it looks really good on the front of a notebook. But this is powerful because you are called to the kingdom for this time. And you are called to be bold, to go out with power. You are anointed to set at liberty the captives. Esther had that revelation. She said, I won't remain silent. In fact, I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will open my church and allow my people to assemble, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will not mask our children in school, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Thank you for your boldness.
Okay, so there it is, right? You can sort of see the movement for all of it. I mean, that move from what Mordecai says to Esther straight to the county commissioner's office and the board and the school boards. No distinction. People have studied hermeneutics or biblical application or something or know anything about the book of Esther. There's a lot going on there. I'm not going to get into, arguing with someone who doesn't want to talk to me about how she framed up her sermon. But it's a pretty good example of what's going on and how people frame these kinds of conversations. So if you're in a certain world where your connection between church and people is fluid like that, the church is supposed to direct the government not the church, and because we the people and churches aren't told by the government what to do, you can see how you could end up in a place where some of that would start to make sense. And it has real implications. You're going to hear from Nick in a moment, and Nick comes from this area where the Patmos Library is, where a bunch of people decided to defund the library, to not fund the library in a special election in August. And so the library was going to close down, and then a famous author had to bail out the library in West Michigan to keep the library going because people organized specifically around the kinds of things that you heard Representative Boebert saying there. And you're going to hear from someone named General Michael Flynn in a moment about the kind of work they're doing. They're doing this specific work all as a tactic inside of a Christian nationalist understanding. All right, so the church is the new Israel, and this Christians using Jewish text stuff is really important as well. This person here is the pastor of the church where Meyer Flores is. He's the one who started the Make America Godly Again movement. And this is also one where you see a number of these same streams coming together. The history of the United States in his estimation, as well as seeing the United States as the new Israel. You'll see people in the church service. You'll see him there wearing what's traditionally a Jewish prayer shawl, and you'll see him with it pulled over his head. You'll see them with a Star of David in their church, and you'll see people blowing a shofar during church services. Very common in certain charismatic and Pentecostal expressions of Christianity, by the way. So this idea of seeing the United States as the new Israel, and then we should apply this, is where a lot of Christian nationalist arguments come from. In fact, the use of the passage from 2 Chronicles. Do you know that passage? If my people, everybody finish it with me, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, I will heal their land. That line, that phrase, 2 Chronicles 13, really popular. There are rooms where I could start out with, and they're just into it like singing Born to Run in New Jersey, right? They're just right on it. They all know it because the narrative is that which was spoken to the nation of Israel is spoken to the United States, so we should move to times of prayer, and that's what will heal the land. So then prayer in school and prayer in places and prayer outside the White House and all this. So you'll see that kind of language that comes up in all of this. So here we go. In fact, on the banner right behind him, it's 2 Chronicles is the passage that's blurred out there in the background on that poster.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. I mean, we like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? How do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know what? It's funny because that separation of church that always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just want to to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble. Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Mayra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick you out of our states, and kick you out of this nation, and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is
politicians are elected to serve the people, right? To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah, but hold on, but we are electing them, so they're representing us.
And there's also Muslims that elect them. And
exactly.
I mean,
so that's what I'm saying. So now, as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
Are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Mayra was just the beginning. It was just, she opened a door for other people to walk through.
I mean, you yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back for God.
That's right. And that was, let me tell you, it was, if I died today, it was worth it.
Okay, so a lot going on in that one too, right? Now, no one should go and tell that person not to preach those things to his church. You get to. And confusion between where's the role of the citizens' motivation to who they're going to vote for versus what the politicians do. That's something we should all be working on. One of our encouragements here is, you're going to get to in a minute, is let's break the no-talk rules and figure out how to talk about this. We don't have to talk about politics in the church as in telling people who to vote for. I've been a pastor for 30 years. If people did what pastors told them to do, that would be one thing, but they don't. So pastors don't even waste your time telling people who to vote for. It doesn't work. But we could find ways to talk about this stuff where people get better at it, where our fluency, where our capacity to talk about where does the place stop from voter intention to representatives' actions. How do we do that? That's a really good question. We should be this democracy project, it's the project of all of us, right? So we should be having conversations like that. And then that other stuff is just, okay, there's just a lot going on there. All right. This holy war narrative is a really big one. This flyer over on the left side is about a thing called the Great Awakening versus the Great Reset. This is General Michael Flynn's traveling roadshow of Christian nationalism pushing. I don't know if you've seen, last week, a few days ago, Frontline came out with a special about it on PBS called Michael Flynn's Holy War. The Atlantic did an article about it just the other day. They've been traveling for more than a year. I went to their event up in Batavia, New York, up by Rochester, and we attended it, and some of us over on the right did a counter protest, Faithful America and Faith in Public Life and Vote Common Good. We did a public action saying these people don't represent us. You know, we're trying to be out saying you can be faithful and not be Christian nationalists. So we went to the Christian Nationalist event, and then I went and toured around inside and went to sessions and talked to people, and I like doing that kind of stuff. That's in my job description and my personality profile, and had lots of great conversations with all kinds of people in there, and really helps me to remember that these are people, ordinary people just like the rest of us, and had a really great conversation. And you'll notice one of the things that and so Michael Flynn's holy war language, and he stands up and says things like, I'm the general, and I'm giving you orders, and Christianity's under attack in America, and we have to, all that stuff. That's what's going on. They're baptizing people, and you'll see some sections of this. But this little clip here is of Michael Flynn from a special that just came out on Frontline last week.
General Michael Flynn, ladies and gentlemen.
Michael Flynn's political influence has only grown since the January 6th insurrection.
Tomorrow, we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The fifth.
Flynn has endorsed around 100 candidates for federal, state, and even local offices, raised millions, and helped launch the Reawaken America tour that mixes politics and religion.
I mean, there is a spiritual war and there is a political war. And they are going on. They're going on in this country right now. Since the November Virginia election across the country, we have overturned 200 school boards in this country. 200.
So Flynn is getting in front of audiences, and he's using Christian nationalist rhetoric to rally people who want to be fed that, because they want to be excited, mobilized.
They're going to shut our churches down, and they're going to tell you, you're going to get mandated to do this, you're going to get mandated to do that.
Christian nationalism threatens democracy because it is fundamentally anti-democratic by nature. It doesn't prioritize the incorporation or the participation of all Americans.
They say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you?
What is that? I'm an Irish Catholic.
We should skip that question. He's an Irish Catholic general who served
I'm a follower of Jesus. How's that?
33 years in the military serving his country.
I would commend this special to you if you're interested in this on Frontline. But that little bit there at the end, they say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you? Well, what is that? I don't even understand what that term is. That's not just a tactic. That's the way a lot of people feel. They're like, I honestly don't know what that term is. Michael Flynn knows what the term is. But a lot of other people, that's why he smirks about it, because he knows, oh, this is this response I'm saying to our people of how you respond to this kind of question. So I believe he knows what it is. But other people don't. So just to say to someone, are you a Christian nationalist? Like, that's not a great starting point with people. You can pull it together by the holy war language, though, and some of the other pieces that happen. So they showed you clips of the session. I was at that very same one where Michael Flynn said that stuff, and I'm chatting with some of these people. Then I go into the tent, and you're going to hear a guy up on the stage, and what he's talking about is the insurrection, and you're going to hear him talking about the red state Walmart-type people, and all they were doing there was trying to do good Christian stuff, and people are spreading this false insurrection story that it was riddled with Christian nationalism. So that's what this part's about. Here's the thing. There's all kinds of people. This guy in a Let's Go Brandon shirt, which I find to be profane. All right, here we go.
And I waded my way through crowds of hundreds, there must have been 1 million people there. And all I saw was good, wholesome, Walmart-type red state Republicans, shofar-blowing charismatics, and a few oddballs dressed up like soldiers. but they were in the minority.
Talking about the insurrection.
Why would they misrepresent our movement to the point that the Christian leadership in the body of Christ doesn't even know they're slandering their own brethren when they agree with the stupid insurrection narrative? We were there to pray and stand in unity to see a reversal of what we saw as a theft.
So there you get it, this idea that, if your prayer brings you into the Senate dais and you've violently taken over, you're just there to pray to try to do something good, and now the victim-villain narratives start to shift. It's all the stuff that you sort of see going on. So it's fairly common for people to use all that kind of language. So if you're talking to people and they've ended up you hear this kind of language, it's a good place to be in conversation with people or to start to recognize, what is Christian nationalism more than somebody arguing about, the foundation, or what did Thomas Jefferson mean in his letter in 1802 to the Baptists in Virginia about the separation of church and state, because there's arguments about Catholicism of the day. It's really stuff going on right now that has moved well beyond those conversations of just a letter to the Baptists. Now, this last bit here is the role of the United States in God's plan. It's one that you might not know about. It's often referred to as the seven mountains of influence. The idea here is that the way that God is going to work in the world, I really felt like I broke that thing. Listen to that. That the way that God is going to work in the world is by putting people of significant influence in places of power. They might be Christian, they might not, but they're going to have significant influence to bring about God's plans and desires. This is super important to a lot of people in the Christian nationalist movements. So it's not just government. It's 7 of them: arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. It's this anointed leader narrative, really common. One of the places that you see it is in government. And when I went into that, the other side of the tent, I walked in on the other side. I'm going to show you the video. It ends up being upright here in a minute, but when the video came in, the start image here is upside down. I leave it that way because it kind of reminds me how I felt when I walked in there. Everything was sort of topsy-turvy. And what that preacher is now saying, when I get to the other side, is the question is not, is a president Christian? The question is, are they anointed by God for the job? Okay, so that's this 7 mountains stuff. He's specifically talking about the next election and the past one, and that's this bit. Walking into the
doesn't even know the Lord.
Great Awakening.
Because all the Christians, if you ever talk to Christians during an election cycle, here's what they care about. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian? They want to know if their candidate's a Christian. Is he a Christian? Let me tell you something. One of the worst presidents we ever had was Jimmy Carter, and he was a Christian. The question you should be asking isn't, is he a Christian? You should ask, is he anointed and chosen by God for the job?
Okay, so this is the argument. He was talking about King Cyrus before that. Maybe you heard that a little bit. This comes up a lot. A lot of Old Testament references to the kings and to holy wars and who's the anointed one of God to lead the people into victory. This happens a lot. Here's another example. This one comes from the Christian Broadcasting Network. This is when Mike Pompeo was the Secretary of State, and as the functioning Secretary of State, he's in Israel, and this is a part that the Christian Broadcasting Network.
You doing well? Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place and the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East, of this Jewish state, remains. I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
See, that's again the kind of thing that Christian nationalists are like, finally we're hearing that spoken from the administrations. This is why so many people of some Christian traditions supported the Trump administration. If you've had a hard time wrapping your head around it, this is why they hear that and they're like, now they're speaking on my behalf. Michael Flynn said that stuff before he, was convicted of the crime that he admitted to. And Mike Pompeo says that, and Mike Pence says that. All the Mikes were saying this stuff, and other people were too. This is the kind of thing that goes on in the Trump administration. So this is so clear to this point. When we go around saying we want to talk about the threat of Christian nationalism, people say we can't talk about that in our church because it seems like you're saying something against the Trump administration. And you're like, how can you get from Christian nationalism to that? This is how. Because it comes up so frequently and so often and so consistently. Here's Pat Robertson. Some of you might know who Pat Robertson is. There's a little bit where he's talking about the war in Syria, and he says this.
However, is now allowing the Christians and the Kurds to be massacred by the Turks. And I believe, and I want to say this with great solemnity, the President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
You hear it? If he permits something to happen, he's going to lose the mandate of heaven. That's the seven mountains theory, that he was chosen by God for a particular function. That's what Mike Pompeo was asked. Is Donald Trump is he the Queen Esther in the story? He's going to lose the mandate of God. So the idea is not what's the faith of the person, but are they selected to do particular tasks that these folks would see as the agenda of God? It's a huge driver of Christian nationalism. So it's not as simple as only elect Christian candidates like, you're hearing from Mastriano and others. All right, so what can churches do? We're going to flash through these things. It's not overly complicated in my view. What can churches do? Well, churches can break the no-talk rules that exist around politics and religion. We can find some ways to talk about it, as I suggested. I've been a pastor for a long while, as I mentioned, and sermons are not the best place to talk about most important things that are tough to talk about. And we have no talk rules in our churches about politics and stuff. Like, this church seems a little different, seems a little more comfortable to talk about civic and but I'm sure there's been some people uncomfortable. There might be some emails sent about this. Maybe people even uncomfortable. Like, we can't talk about it in that place. We could over in this place. We've got to figure out as churches how we do it. But if you know anything about family therapy and family systems therapy, you know that a family systems therapist will say, hey, if you got no talk rules in your family, you got to figure out how to break them. But the way you break your no talk rules isn't to just start talking about it, right? Because you don't know how to talk about it yet. So you have to develop new skills to know how to talk about it, because all your no-talk rules have gotten you into a place where you have conflictual relationships every time you try to talk about it, and things just get worse. So the first way to break no-talk rules is to say, we're going to talk about it, but not yet. We're going to develop the skills to be able to talk about it, so that then when we talk about it, we can end up in some places that are different than just our normal routine. So there's lots of curriculum. We have curriculum. Christians Against Christian Nationalism has curriculum. There's a bunch of books that have curriculum. There's a bunch of stuff that can be helpful. I'm going to flash some up here on the screen in a minute for you to see those. So this, in other words, as I think my little 3-year-old grandson, a 6-year-old grandson would understand, sometimes you just got to talk about Bruno. So we can't just keep going around saying you can't talk about Bruno around here. If you don't know that reference, there's a great movie still in your future for you to watch at some point. Kristen Dumais has a great book on this topic. If you want to get into talking about this, I'd suggest to her this book, Jesus and John Wayne, where she talks about the role of masculine influence in the church and how it plays out. And as one of our friends and one of our presenters in this stuff, Shane, says, Kristen's not suggesting that Jesus or that John Wayne is the Messiah. They're suggesting they wish the Messiah was a lot more like John Wayne. And there's an attitude of militaristic, strong, tough, win at all costs kind of thing. And that's a big part of Christian nationalism. So this book is a really great little help for it. And Chris, we have some great interviews with Kristen on our page. It also suggests that churches make it about faith, that civic engagement can be a way that people understand their faith. Not that you're going to only practice it in the civic spaces, but it's also one of the places. Like, it's one of the things you also do. So let's get really good at it, but talk about it not just as a political agenda, but as a discipleship project, and to talk about it as an issue of faith. And then let's be honest as churches about the places where Christianity does have a preference in our society. We do give a lot of preference to Christianity. Christianity gets a default on a lot of things, right? So does religion in our society. We should notice those and name those and be willing to talk about them. And it's really healthy to say, are there ways that we continue to participate in this subtlety of Christianity being the deferred starting point for things, the assumed place where people come from. and how they understand the world and how we should. And what can individuals do? Engagement and empathy is what I'd suggest to you. Going to play a bit from Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove here, and I think you really love it. He writes 2 books, one called The Reconstructing the Gospel, Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. You might know Jonathan. He works with Reverend William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign and Moral Mondays thing, so if you recognize him, it might be from that. And then his book called Revolution of Values, Reclaiming Public Faith for the Common Good. Not one of our brand things or anything, but Jonathan's a really good friend and travels with us and does speaking with us, and he's really great. And I think this will help you understand the empathy and engagement piece.
Yes, indeed, because you can't assume that the people who believe this are crazy in their context. Again, back to the empirical data that they were just laying out, there's far too many people to think that this is just, some sort of aberration that needs to be treated in individuals. No, this is a culture that is feeding people lies, reinforcing those lies, and inviting people to understand themselves as part of what I think people of faith, Christians, can only call an idolatrous worship of the nation as the kind of ultimate end. And the alternative to that has to be building a better community to invite people into. And I think, while we need to be building culture in all kinds of ways everywhere, any strategic effort to address this has to especially focus on building community in rural places, and in particular in places that have been media deserts, because that is where, to get into the weeds a little bit, the Council for National Policy that I mentioned has had the executive leadership of all of those media companies that Sam mentioned, from American Family Radio to Breitbart News to Fox. They've all been on that council. They've all coordinated with each other for decades. And what they have done is they have strategically gone into places where there are not local newspapers anymore, where there's not local radio, and they have blanketed it with their message. So it's entirely possible, if your pastor participates in the Family Research Council's pastor program and takes their free literature, and if you are a member of the Republican Party and the NRA, which, by the way, have also coordinated very closely with this group, and if you listen to American Family Radio when you're driving the tractor out in the field, it's entirely possible that you never hear any other narrative in your life, right? There is no alternative in the place where you are. And so you would be crazy in that context not to believe this stuff. So I think anybody who knows that this is a lie has a moral obligation to try to enter these spaces and interrupt the wraparound culture that has been created by this propaganda campaign.
Really great, isn't it? To sort of look and listen and understand and engage. We have 2 more pieces for you that are pretty short. Nick has a poetic piece, so we end with some poetry, and then Steph Mahan is going to fill your heart with a little bit of hope, a little bit of song goodness, and we'll have time for some questions if somebody has them right in between those two. So we'll just take a couple of minutes for some questions. But this is Nick Brock. Nick is somebody else who came to some of our events and now travels around doing this stuff with us. So, friends, Nick Brock.
Thank you. The original Declaration of Independence rests within a frame made of pure titanium that's coated with gold. The glass enclosing it is tempered, laminated, and calibrated to a thickness of 3/8 of an inch in order to block out harmful UV light. And 70 bolts around the frame apply 300 pounds of pressure per linear inch, sealing it in. Inside the frame, parchment made from 1776, sits atop a perforated aluminum platform so that moisture can reach the back side of it in order to keep it supple. And all the while, inert argon, kept at approximately 40% humidity, and 60 degrees Fahrenheit staves off the oxidation process. And most grandiose of all, the case housing the Declaration, along with the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, collectively known as the Charters of Freedom, are lowered beneath the ground every night into a custom-built vault made to withstand a nuclear blast. But despite these advances for preservation and security, the ability to detect problems is growing faster than the capability to solve them. And most importantly, figuring out what to do if a problem arises. And so it is with us, friends. Though our concern reside not with the preservation and securing of fading parchment and ink nearly 2.5 centuries old, but with preserving and securing within the hearts and minds of the people a readiness to re-examine, reimagine, and reinterpret the guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when they become crooked, narrow, and hell-bent on making America great in the name of me, the people, instead of we, the people. What then shall we do, you might ask? I'd like to suggest scripture, American scripture. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln would use only 272 words for delivering his Gettysburg Address. The speech, lasting just 2 minutes long, would enter the lexicon of American scripture as one of the most powerful and concise statements of freedom our nation has ever heard. And drawing upon his unwavering quest for pursuing the true spirit of our nation's founding creed, Lincoln would posit a vision of America amidst the chaos and rancor of a civil war. So standing thus on the blood-stained fields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln would stand up and say, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln would continue on, but in a larger sense, it is for us to be here dedicated to this unfinished work thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Lincoln's invitation to participate in the nation's unfinished work of equality would indeed usher in a new birth of freedom, rooted in the sentiment that American exceptionalism, thenceforward and forever, shall include those pushed to the very margins of society, the outcasts. And that to truly make and keep America great, this exceptionalism is incumbent upon each and every citizen patriot of this nation. And then not to only pursue only their individual liberties, but also the unalienable rights of others endowed by their Creator, no matter their race, color, national origin, and later to include sex, marital status, age, disability, etc. Or in other words, love your neighbor as yourself. In the hands of Lincoln, the Declaration became a living document, willing and able to inspire faith, hope, and love of country for the common good, whilst confronting conspiracy, secession, insurrection, and a rebellion against the peace and sanctity of the United States government. Friends, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Ultimately, though, the authority for preserving the principles of the Declaration rests not just in the hands of presidents and politicians, but in we, the people, poets, prophets, preachers, and you. Yes, you, sir. And you, ma'am. And you, and you, and you, and you. Which brings me back to where I began, with parchment and ink, what to do, and this Sharpie. There were 56 signers willing to sign their name to the Declaration of Independence, an act of treason, mind you, against the British Crown. And chief among them were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and the like. The first, however, was John Hancock, with his signature best remembered for being the largest and most flamboyant over all the rest. Anecdotes from American folklore suggest that Hancock wrote in such a manner as to make his defiance against King George III more than obvious to the naked eye and to perhaps those needing spectacles. But no historical document remains as to why he wrote in that way. But what we do know is this: someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Friends, one way we invite you into the work of Vote Common Good is by having you sign on with us. When you make a declaration, a commitment to confronting insurrections and Christian nationalism, we will take you with us throughout the entire Midwest. And moreover, we will take the work of this church and the other churches here tonight with us, and we will share that story. So with this pen, though we don't have our bus with us tonight, there are pieces of paper near the swag table where you can meet with me and others, and we would love to have you sign your name, city, and state, and then we will place that on our big orange bus as you see there. So meet me afterwards. Finally, friends, I'd like to leave you with these closing words from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Though the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, may our government of the people, by the people, and for the people never perish from the earth. Thank you.